She was just an ordinary maid in Lagos, used to being invisible in the corridors of a luxury hotel. But on a night of panic, fleeing from a mere cockroach, she opened the wrong door and walked straight into the bathroom of Nigeria's most feared millionaire guest. What began as an embarrassing accident would turn into a web of intrigue, betrayal, and passion capable of changing their lives forever. Working at a luxury hotel in Lagos seemed to many a golden opportunity. For the young woman, however, it meant constant exhaustion and veiled humiliations. While guests paraded through marble-lined corridors and sparkling chandeliers, she carried buckets, heavy linens, and a restrained smile that hid her fatigue. Her uniform, always clean but worn, did not shield her from superior glances or the sharp words of those who believed money could buy dignity. Yet despite the weight of it all, there was a quiet strength that kept her standing, as if each day was a battle won against the abandonment of life. It was precisely this contrast, glimmering luxury versus invisible sweat, that made her story so unique, yet so real. At the end of her shift, when the corridors were deserted and the expensive perfume of the guests still lingered in the air, she returned to a rented room in a modest neighborhood. Her makeshift bed, a thin mattress on a wooden frame, awaited her with the same hardness as the peeling walls. On the other side, her mother coughed weakly, weakened by an illness. That drained not only her strength, but also the little money saved. Her two younger siblings slept together on a mat on the floor, perhaps dreaming of a future that still seemed too far away. Every time she closed the door behind her, she felt the brutal distance between the hotel's golden corridors and the cold reality waiting at home. Among colleagues, the environment offered no refuge. Some older maids saw her as a threat, others as a target for malicious laughter to pass the long working hours. Sometimes tasks were deliberately left for her to handle. Dirtier rooms, tougher bathrooms, more demanding guests. But silently, she completed each task with meticulous dedication. Perhaps deep down she believed that every perfectly folded towel and every polished floor gleaming with light was a way to prove that dignity didn't need wealth to exist. What no one noticed was how that silence built, brick by brick, the image of a woman who refused to give up. Curiously, despite the hardship, small gestures kept her hope alive. An elderly guest once left a piece of cake wrapped in a napkin as a thank you. A foreign tourist, charmed by her patience in handling lost luggage, gave her a small old coin as a keepsake. She kept these things in a hidden box under her mattress, as if they were medals from an invisible battlefield. They were reminders that, even in the most overlooked position, kindness could still appear when least expected. These quiet memories were the flame that kept her from burning out completely. What many didn't know was the almost military discipline that guided her days. Before the sun rose, she was already up. She quietly washed her face in a plastic basin, carefully tied back her hair, and put on her uniform as if donning armor. The crowded bus to the city center was just the first leg of her journey, followed by navigating noisy streets and corners where street vendors shouted prices. She walked this path with the same steady gaze, without complaint, as if each step were part of a silent training for something greater. After all, surviving in Lagos was no easy task, and learning to silence her own pain was a skill that became almost mandatory. Yet, there were moments when fragility overflowed. One night, after an unfair scolding from a manager over a demanding guest, she walked to the staff bathroom and let silent tears fall, careful not to draw attention. She looked in the mirror, wiped her face, and returned to work, as if nothing had happened. This ability to quickly recompose herself revealed a rare trait, the capacity to turn pain into silence and silence into strength. But deep down, even she wondered how long she could keep fighting so many battles without leaving invisible scars on her soul. This routine of deprivation didn't extinguish her dreams. She held within her the desire to study, to become a nurse, perhaps even a doctor, so her mother would no longer depend on overcrowded public clinics. Sometimes, while making the luxurious beds of the guests, she imagined what it would be like to lie on such soft sheets, not as a maid, but as someone who had finally earned a place in the sun. This blend of pain and hope shaped a heart that was strong yet vulnerable, like a cracked vase that, though wounded, still held water. And it was precisely at this point of tension between strength and fragility that her life began to change. Because fate, always unpredictable, was preparing an encounter she could never have imagined. Something so unlikely that it would start with a simple scare, a cockroach scurrying across the hotel floor, and end up opening the doors to a path that would change everything. Here at African Village Story, every story reveals the hidden strength in those no one sees. Subscribe now and show that you too believe in the power of overcoming. The hotel's most talked about guest didn't need to speak to command respect, simply crossing the lobby with firm steps, surrounded by the sudden silence of the staff was enough. His polished leather shoes gleamed on the marble floor, and the impeccable cut of his suits betrayed a fortune capable of buying any luxury. But the detail that truly struck people wasn't in his clothes. It was in his cold, calculating gaze that seemed to pierce anyone who dared hold his eyes for more than a moment. It felt like standing before someone who carried more shadows than light, and that only fueled the rumors about his life. Among the staff, stories circulated ranging from shady overseas deals to dangerous alliances with influential politicians. Some swore his empire was built on questionable import contracts. Others whispered it came from something even darker, tied to family disputes that ended in silent tragedies. No one knew for certain which parts were true, but everyone agreed on one thing. You didn't reach that level of power without leaving enemies in your wake. This aura of mystery, rather than repelling curiosity, only fed the sense that secrets lay behind every gesture. Despite his wealth, there was something money couldn't buy: companionship. The hotel's luxurious corridors welcomed him as a stage, but when the presidential suite's doors closed, only silence kept him company. Few knew, but behind that impenetrable demeanor was an open wound. Years earlier, a devastating betrayal had left him scarred forever. A woman he trusted not only left him, but took with her part of his fortune and his honor. Since then, every smile he received was weighed as a transaction, and every gesture of affection seemed to hide a hidden cost. This past shaped a distrustful personality, incapable of yielding to any approach. It was as if life had turned an already hardened heart into cold stone. In business, he became unbeatable, precisely because he trusted no one. Where others saw partnerships, he saw traps. Where others sought friendship, he found calculation and self-interest. This sharp perspective helped him multiply his fortune, but also built a wall that isolated him further from the real world. And the higher that wall grew, the harder it seemed to tear down. The truth was, even the fear the staff felt was a reflection of this invisible armor. No one dared contradict him, and even managers lowered their eyes in his presence. The irony was that this respect didn't stem from admiration, but from caution. It wasn't the kind of power that inspired genuine loyalty, but rather the kind that enforced silence. Perhaps this was the greatest proof that, despite owning so much wealth, there was something he could never buy: the genuine trust of another. And it's in this void that the story holds its next twist. Because amidst so many secrets and the distance created by his coldness, fate was preparing an unlikely encounter. A clash of worlds so different it seemed impossible. The maid with weary eyes and a life marked by sacrifices didn't yet know, but she would be the one to breach the wall no one else dared to face. And from that moment, nothing would ever be the same. Tell us in the comments, no one is safe, if you also believe that even the powerful can be wounded by betrayal. The corridor was silent, lit only by cold lamps reflecting off the polished floor. The young woman walked quickly, balancing a bucket and a cleaning rag, when a detail disrupted her routine. A cockroach emerged from under a service door and darted toward her. It wasn't just disgust, but an almost irrational fear that surged through her body like an electric shock. Her heart raced, her hands trembled, and the sensation that the scurrying insect was multiplying in her eyes made her drop the bucket, spilling water across the floor. It was real panic, the kind logic couldn't contain, and in her instinct to escape, every second felt like an eternity. Her legs moved on their own, nearly tripping over the newly formed puddle. Breathing heavily, she sought immediate refuge, and the first door ahead seemed her only salvation. She turned the handle without thinking twice, the metallic sound echoing in the corridor's silence. It felt as though behind that door she'd find shelter from the invisible enemy chasing her. She didn't notice her surroundings or weigh the risks. She just pushed and entered, unaware that she was crossing the line between the miserable routine of a maid and the inaccessible world of a millionaire feared by all. The scene before her couldn't have been more inappropriate. The steam from a recent shower still filled the space, turning the bathroom into a warm mist that fogged the mirror. Freshly used white towels lay on the marble counter, and the distant sound of dripping water signaled someone had just left the shower. For a moment, she thought she'd found an empty space, a temporary hideout from the cockroach, but the heavy breathing echoing from behind the curtain of steam revealed she wasn't alone, and that detail made her blood run cold. From the mist emerged the silhouette of a tall man, wrapped only in a towel around his waist. The millionaire, accustomed to absolute control over every detail of his life, hadn't expected such an invasion of his most private space. His eyes, cold as always, narrowed as they landed on the trembling figure in a maid's uniform, soaked from the spilled bucket. The silence that followed was so intense, it felt like an invisible duel. On one side, the fragility of a woman barely able to form words. On the other, the unrelenting authority of someone never interrupted without permission. Her mind raced in desperation, trying to find a convincing explanation. The fear of the cockroach no longer mattered. Now the danger had a face and a name. A poorly worded excuse could mean not just losing her job, but destroying her family's only source of income. Yet what terrified her most was the millionaire's lack of immediate reaction. He simply stared, as if each second of silence was an invisible judgment. And the longer it lasted, the more it felt like fate had just written a turn impossible to erase. This improbable encounter, born from a mundane scare, wasn't just an embarrassing moment. It was the start of a story that would defy the logic of two worlds that should never have crossed. A maid marked by the daily struggle for survival, and a millionaire forged by loneliness and distrust. The cockroach, small and insignificant to any other gaze, was the spark that ignited a collision of destinies that would transform lives forever. And from that moment, neither could imagine how far this chance encounter would take them. Do you believe that fate uses even the most trivial details, like a simple cockroach, to change someone's life? Write in the comments, fate has its plans. If you also think nothing happens by chance. The steam still hung in the air, casting hazy outlines on the white tiles. The millionaire emerged from the shadows, wrapped only in a towel around his waist. Water droplets sliding down his defined chest. The contrast was stark. On one side, the imposing presence of a man unaccustomed to being surprised. On the other, the fragility of the panting maid, her eyes wide as if she'd just trespassed into forbidden territory. The silence was broken only by her trembling breath, mingling with the distant echo of water still dripping in the shower. In that moment, the air grew so heavy it seemed impossible to breathe. Her hands rose in an instinctive gesture of apology, as if bracing for a blow that hadn't yet come. Words stumbled from her mouth. "I'm sorry, I didn't know. It was a mistake." Her tone lacked the flattering melody the millionaire was used to, carrying instead the urgent sincerity of someone pleading to hold on to the little they had. That voice held more truth than any rehearsed praise from business partners or false declarations from past lovers. It was the voice of someone with nothing to offer but their own honesty, and for that very reason, his. Silence stretched even longer. To a man who'd seen empty promises used as currency, this scene was almost disarming. He stood before a figure who didn't calculate her words, who sought no advantage, who was merely trying to survive the embarrassment. His sharp gaze, usually used to intimidate, now lingered with a faint trace of curiosity. Such genuine reactions were rare. In the corridors of power and wealth, every gesture had a price. Every smile hid a contract. But there, in that steamy bathroom, was just a terrified woman clinging to the fragile thread of her dignity. And that unexpected detail began to crack, almost imperceptibly, the ice of years of distrust. The setting, once merely a backdrop of luxury, transformed into a stage of tension and revelation. The cold marble reflected the scene, as if witnessing a collision between two universes that should never have touched. The millionaire, used to controlling every detail of his routine, now faced something he couldn't: dominate, the spontaneity of chance. The maid, meanwhile, felt the weight of every second as if it were a final judgment. Her mind raced with images of her sick mother, her siblings sleeping on floor mats. The real risk of losing her job if the situation was misinterpreted. It was more than mere embarrassment. It was her entire life hanging by the thread of his reaction, and what could have ended in immediate dismissal or a hushed scandal led to something no one could have predicted. The millionaire didn't shout, didn't call security, didn't make accusations. He simply stared with piercing eyes, analyzing every tremor, every word, every gesture of this unexpected presence. Deep down, he didn't understand why he couldn't dismiss her immediately. Perhaps it was curiosity. Perhaps it was the memory of a time when he still believed in people's sincerity. Or perhaps it was the hint that something much bigger was about to begin. The young woman, without realizing it, had already sparked something rare in him, something money couldn't buy and loneliness had long buried, the desire to look twice at someone. And this seemingly trivial detail, born from a scare and a door opened by chance, was the first step toward a story that would change not just two lives, but the way both viewed fate. The next morning, the hotel buzzed with an invisible tension. Word spread quickly through the corridors. A high-value item had gone missing from the presidential suite. It was a rare, imported watch, a piece that caught attention even from those who didn't understand luxury. In a place where every detail was monitored, an accusation like this hit like a bomb. And the cruelest part was that, in such situations, no one looked for evidence, just an easy scapegoat. A few sideways glances were enough for the maid to be singled out as the prime suspect. Envy, silent until then, found its voice. Whispers echoed among starched uniforms. She went into his room, uncalled. Everyone saw. Her leave in a panic. Who else would have the chance? Each word carried more venom than the last. No one mentioned the cockroach, the scare, or the embarrassment of the night before. For many, this was the perfect opportunity to get rid of the employee who, despite her humility, stood out for her dedication. All it took was planting doubt, and the chain of gossip did the rest. With every minute, her reputation dissolved into the air like steam. When the news reached the millionaire, his silence once again dominated the room. His mind immediately returned to the scene from the night before. The trembling figure, the apology, the sincerity in her gaze. Could that same woman be capable of stealing something so valuable? Cold logic said yes. After all, necessity is a powerful motivator. But something about that memory felt off. Her image didn't align with the calculation of a theft. There was desperation, there was shame, but there was no malice. This contradiction sparked a dilemma he hadn't faced before. The millionaire had never had patience for doubt. In business, suspicion meant betrayal, and betrayal meant immediate severance. Few knew, but this instinct was shaped by the pain of a past loss that cost him both fortune and trust. Yet, faced with this accusation, something stopped him from acting with his usual coldness. The maid's face lingered in his memory, clashing with the venom spreading through the corridors. What would have been a swift decision turned into an internal labyrinth. For the first time in years, he felt inclined to investigate before condemning. Meanwhile, the maid bore the weight of collective judgment. Every sideways glance felt like a verdict, every whisper a new accusation. Her throat went dry as she thought of her sick mother and young siblings. Losing her job would mean more than dishonor. It would be the ruin of her entire family. Yet she had no way to defend herself. How could she prove her innocence when everyone had already decided she was guilty? The pain of injustice burned deeper than the fear of being fired, and that pain became fuel for something greater, the hope that, somewhere, truth could still prevail. In that moment, the millionaire realized he had to choose. Follow the cold instinct that had always protected him, or listen to the strange feeling that there was more to this story than met the eye. The decision wasn't yet made, but the mere act of hesitating marked a profound shift, because when a heart, scarred by betrayal, gives room to doubt, it means a crack is beginning to form in the wall of ice, and through that crack, an unexpected flame could pass. What about you? Do you think it's fair to condemn someone based only on appearances? Write in the comments, "I want the truth," if you also believe every accusation deserves investigation before judgment. The silent investigation began as a natural habit for someone who'd built a fortune distrusting everyone. The millionaire started noticing details others overlooked: staff entry and exit times, odd movements in the corridors, hushed whispers at the end of shifts. Then a slip-up revealed the truth. A colleague, always overly eager to please, was seen handing a small package to the manager in the dead of night. A security camera ignored by most caught the act. There was the proof that unraveled the unjust accusation. The shock didn't come from the discovery itself, but from realizing he'd allowed the maid to face public humiliation. Without defense, the injustice hit him like a mirror of his own past pain. After all, he too had been betrayed by someone he thought loyal, and now he saw he'd nearly repeated the same mistake against an innocent person. This realization brought a weight he rarely carried: shame. The man who never admitted fault now had to face his own internal judgment. As he reflected, he began to see the young woman differently. Even after days of being looked at with suspicion, she continued her tasks with the same discipline. Her hands folded towels with precision, her eyes avoided conflict, and her silent steps crossed corridors without showing resentment. It was as if she understood that to survive, she had to keep moving forward without expecting immediate justice. This attitude intrigued him. It wasn't submission but quiet resilience, a kind of dignity that couldn't be bought or faked. Curiously, in the simplest details, he started seeing what he never noticed in powerful people. The way she discreetly helped younger colleagues, even while being the target of gossip. The care she took in quietly collecting wilted flowers from a forgotten vase in the lobby, as if small gestures still mattered. It dismantled the cold logic that everyone was driven by self-interest. For the first time in years, he began to entertain the idea that sincerity still existed, hidden in the places no one paid attention to. The revelation of the true thief not only cleared the maid's name, but also ignited in him an unexpected desire to somehow make amends for the harm done. It wouldn't be easy as a wound to trust leaves scars, but each day he noticed more the contrast between her silent loyalty and the blatant corruption of those who betrayed him. And in that contrast, a bridge began to form. What once seemed like a mere administrative error now became an invisible bond. This fragile connection was born from overcoming injustice, two distant worlds linked by a truth that prevailed over lies. The millionaire, for the first time in a long time, felt he didn't need to only distrust. He could choose to look deeper. And the maid, without knowing it, had already awakened in him something no wealth or business deal could ever reignite: trust. Have you ever been unjustly accused and then proven innocent? Share in the comments. Her routine no longer went unnoticed. The millionaire, accustomed to scrutinizing every detail in business meetings, now applied that same cold gaze to the hotel corridors. The difference was that his focus wasn't on contracts or figures anymore, but on the maid who, despite so many humiliations, continued her tasks with unwavering discipline. Every gesture of hers seemed to tell an untold story. The care in aligning towels, the distant look when closing windows, the quiet haste of someone carrying burdens far heavier than buckets and linens. This curiosity grew day by day until an unexpected scene changed everything. That night, the shift had ended for nearly everyone, but the maid was still hurrying toward the side exit. In her arms, a transparent plastic bag revealed boxes of cheap medicine bought from discount pharmacies. Her face carried exhaustion, but also a painful urgency. It wasn't the haste of someone eager to rest, but of someone desperate to get home to ease a loved one's suffering. Seeing this, the millionaire realized there was a silent battle behind her discreet demeanor, and for the first time, he felt compelled to act. His imported car waited in the garage, gleaming under artificial lights. When she emerged through the gate, she didn't expect to find that imposing figure waiting for her. The invitation came curt, without preamble. "Let me drive you." The shock was immediate. A humble employee could never imagine sharing space with someone so powerful. Her hesitation lasted seconds that felt like hours, but faced with his quiet insistence, she accepted. As she closed the car door, she noticed the contrast. On one side, soft leather and air conditioning. On the other, calloused hands clutching medicine that cost weeks of effort. The drive through the city revealed an unknown side of both. Amid busy streets and incessant honking, the initial silence broke with simple questions about her family, about why she worked so many extra hours. Slowly, her words began to flow. She spoke of her ailing mother, her young siblings who depended on her for school, nights spent awake trying to stretch an insufficient salary. There was no self-pity in her tone, just raw reality, spoken by someone who'd learned not to expect miracles. That sincerity struck a heart that for too long hadn't heard unfiltered truths. When it was his turn to speak, his voice carried a different weight. It wasn't the narrative of a wealthy man listing achievements, but the bitter confession of someone who'd lost more than money. He revealed the betrayal that had devastated him years ago, a wound so deep it turned him into a cold, distrustful man. The story, told in short, firm sentences, felt like a blade being pulled from an old wound. For the first time, he admitted that no amount of accumulated luxury could erase the pain of being deceived by someone he trusted most. And in that leather seat, facing a simple maid, he found the courage to voice what he'd hidden even from himself. The conversation, which began with hesitation, ended with an invisible connection. It wasn't romance, not yet. It was something rarer. The sense that two different pains could recognize and respect each other. The car moved through the Lagos night, but what truly progressed was the silent understanding that such distant fates could intersect. And from that moment, neither could look at the other the same way. Their discreet, growing closeness didn't go unnoticed. Glances exchanged in corridors, brief conversations in unlikely places, and even the subtle change in the millionaire's demeanor were signs that drew attention. In an environment rife with competition and gossip, any detail became fuel for speculation, and no one was more bothered by this than the hotel manager. Ambitious and vain, she'd long harbored fantasies of winning over the most powerful man to ever set foot in the hotel. Seeing his attention turn to a mere maid felt like a public slap. Resentment quickly turned to venom. The manager knew the hotel's corridors and the staff's weaknesses well. A whispered word in the right ear, and rumors took on a life of their own. Within hours, distorted stories began to spread. That the maid was offering herself for money, that she used her mother's illness as an excuse for favors, that she was approaching him with calculated intentions. The phrases, repeated from mouth to mouth, gained strength as if they were truths, and the more they circulated, the harder it became to undo the damage. The millionaire soon heard the rumors. Veiled messages reached his ears. "Be careful, she's not what she seems. She's taking advantage of your generosity." For a man already scarred by betrayal, those words were like prodding an open wound. The heart that had begun to warm to her presence was now put to the test. After all, it wouldn't be the first time someone masked their intentions to get close to him. Doubt crept back into his thoughts like an old enemy that had never truly left. Meanwhile, the maid had no idea of the storm brewing. She continued tending to the hotel's details, believing her routine would go unnoticed. But with every step she felt heavy stares, muffled whispers, and the invisible judgment born of lies. The worst wasn't enduring her colleague's malice, but the possibility that the millionaire might believe those insinuations. Losing her job would already be devastating, but losing his trust meant losing the only space where she was beginning to be seen with dignity. The dilemma deepened in the man's heart. On one side, memories of her sincerity in the bathroom, her trembling hands clutching cheap medicine, the honest gaze that asked for nothing but respect. On the other, the venomous echoes reinforcing the idea that no one could be trusted. The battle between reason and emotion took on dangerous contours. He knew that if he gave in to the gossip, he'd be repeating the same cycle that had kept him trapped in the past. But if he trusted blindly, he might open himself to another wound. Each night, the silence of his luxurious room grew more suffocating. This invisible war wasn't just between the two of them, but between truth and lies. A plot driven by jealousy threatened to destroy something that hadn't even begun. But it was precisely at the edge of this tension that fate prepared the next twist. Because when everything seemed about to collapse, the truth would find a way to prevail, bringing consequences that would change their lives forever. Do you believe jealousy destroys faster than any lie? Write in the comments. The announcement of her dismissal hit like a death sentence. Without a chance to defend herself, the maid received the cold notice from management, amid glances mixing pity and satisfaction. For many, she was just another piece discarded in the chessboard of a luxury hotel. For her it was ruin. Her sick mother, her young siblings, the rent about to come due. The corridors she'd always walked with steady steps now seemed longer and heavier, each closed door sounding like applause for the lies crushing her. But even at the edge of the abyss, she held her head high. Her silence, once again, revealed a dignity that even injustice couldn't steal. As she packed her few belongings in the staff locker room, an unexpected detail changed the course of the story. A discreet colleague approached with an apprehensive look. In his hands, a phone filled with messages and audio recordings exposed the manager's plot. Her voice, clear and undisguised, laid out every step of the conspiracy, from inventing rumors to choosing the right moment to force the dismissal. The proof that had been missing was now there, pulsing on a screen that could tear down the mask of deceit. In that moment, the weight of injustice began to transform into a weapon of truth. The evidence was delivered directly to the millionaire, who until then had been balancing reason and doubt. Upon hearing the recordings, there was no room for hesitation. The anger, restrained by years of self-control, erupted like never before. The realization that he'd allowed such injustice against someone who'd already faced so many humiliations was unbearable. The man accustomed to punishing betrayals in business now saw betrayal within his own environment, and this time, the victim was someone who was beginning to mean much more than an invisible employee. The confrontation was marked by heavy silence and tense stares. The millionaire, cold and direct, presented the evidence before the gathered staff. The manager, who'd always hidden behind her position's authority, had no way to deny it. Each played audio was a blow that crumbled her mask of superiority. Staff who'd once been complicit in silence now looked at her with disdain. The power she thought she held evaporated in seconds, leaving only shame and defeat. It was the end of an era of manipulations, but what truly stood out wasn't the manager's fall, but the next gesture. The millionaire announced the maid's immediate reinstatement, not with the cold tone of an employer, but with the firmness of someone who recognizes worth. For the first time, he didn't see her as just an employee. He saw the strength that had withstood injustice, the dignity maintained even in despair. This decision, made before everyone, was more than reparation. It was the opening of a new chapter where trust and humanity began to take the place once dominated by loneliness. Her gaze, when called back, carried surprise and restrained emotion. It wasn't just the chance to reclaim her job, but to be recognized as someone with value beyond the hotel's walls. The millionaire, in taking that stand, also transformed. He went from being the feared man to someone capable of protecting, of seeing, of trusting. And in that moment, through shared glances, fate sealed a connection that would change their lives forever. Time showed that trust isn't built on grand gestures, but on small daily proofs. The millionaire began to approach her slowly, offering something he'd been unable to give anyone for years: attention. His cold, calculating gaze gave way to brief corridor conversations, simple questions about her mother's health, and even subtle signs of interest in her routine's details. The maid, who initially kept her distance out of fear of further humiliation, slowly let her guard down. With each encounter, she discovered that behind the armor of power was a wounded man, still trying to rebuild himself. This realization left her torn between caution and hope. Their relationship began, almost invisibly to others' eyes. A shy smile amid the hotel's rush, a ride offered without ulterior motives, the gesture of sharing a quick meal at the end of an exhausting shift. To outsiders, these might seem trivial moments, but to them, they were signs of a new path. The millionaire, used to weighing every word like a contract clause, now allowed himself to laugh at simple jokes. The maid, who always stayed silent to avoid attention, began to speak with more confidence. And in this unlikely balance, the barriers began to crumble. It wasn't an easy transition. There was mutual distrust, memories of wounds that still ached, and above all, the pressure of an environment that didn't forgive improbable relationships. Rumors still surfaced, stares still weighed heavy, but nothing seemed strong enough to destroy what was growing between them. With each challenge, their bond strengthened. When a financial issue nearly made her give up her studies, he encouraged her to keep going. When nightmares of past betrayal woke him in the middle of the night, she listened in silence, showing that sometimes words aren't needed to heal. Slowly, they discovered that true love doesn't bloom in magical moments, but in scars that find solace in one another. He, used to controlling everything, learned to yield. She, used to enduring everything, learned to trust. This role reversal didn't turn them into fairy tale characters, but into more complete human beings. And it was precisely this imperfection that made their story so real. The audience could see in every scene that there were no artificial miracles, just sweat, tears, and choices made through pain. The most symbolic moment came far from the hotel's luxurious corridors, in a simple house in a working-class neighborhood. The maid's mother, once frail, now received proper care. Her smile upon opening the door and seeing her daughter with the man who once seemed untouchable was proof that, despite their world's differences, something greater bound their lives. It wasn't expensive clothes or imported cars that gave meaning to the scene, but the simplicity of a table set with care, laughter breaking the silence, and the feeling that, at last, there was room to start anew. In the final image, The camera doesn't show luxury or ostentation. It shows a healthy mother, a relieved daughter, and a man who, after so long, seemed finally at peace. The love there didn't need palaces or exaggerated promises. It was enough to recognize that two broken souls had found strength in each other. The ending didn't erase the suffering they'd endured, but it proved that even pain can be a starting point for something greater. It was the kind of happy ending that doesn't impose itself as fantasy, but is born from the simplest truth: to love and be loved despite the scars. Some stories don't begin in palaces, but in silent corridors where pain and dignity meet. This young woman didn't earn her place with wealth, but with courage. And this man didn't learn to love through the force of power, but through the vulnerability of daring to trust again. Because when truth withstands lies, even the coldest heart warms. And when a mother smiles again, fate bows before the strength of a love that refused to be crushed. New stories are coming. Click the video below and dive into the next emotion. Until then.